let's break down 6 running backs that are set to absolutely dominate week 3 of 2024 fantasy football. These are running backs that you cannot afford to bench this week because they are about to absolutely pop off and help you dominate your league mate and leave them crying in a corner as we approach week 3. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 3 pick'ems are already live. And if you guys want to claim a free pick'em to use towards week 3 action, if you watch this before Thursday Night Football, you're going to claim a Aaron Rodgers over half of a total yard. If you watch this later in the week, you're going to claim a free Patrick Mahomes over half of a total yard. And all Underdog users, whether you are a new or returning customer, are going to get a free CeeDee Lamb over half of a total yard. So everyone gets a free pick'em, and new customers are going to walk away with 2 free pick'ems for week 3 action. And on top of that, you're going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog when you use promo code THECATCH. That's up to $1,000 in bonus cash plus free pick'ems when you use promo code THECATCH to sign up. That link is down below. All right, very quickly, let's take a look at week 2's players. We went over Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, J.K. Dobbins, James Conner, Brian Robinson Jr., and Jerome Ford. Not too bad for week 2. J.K. Dobbins was our winner of week 2, but overall solid performances out of all these guys, except for Jerome Ford. You are banned from the must-start videos until further notice. Apparently, Donta Foreman is too valuable in the second half for you to show your must-start value. You look good in the first half. Don't know what happened. Apparently, Donta Foreman is your dad, so we will move along. But once again, not too bad overall for the week 2 calls. All right, and I will say before we hop into today's video, it is a doozy for the running back position this week. Like, you've got some phenomenal matchups for running backs, but a lot of guys that are a little spooky that I didn't quite feel like putting on today's list. You got Javonte Williams at the Buccaneers giving up the 27th most points to the position. Rachaad White, dealing with that groin injury. Bucky Irving looming, going up against the Broncos in that same matchup here, giving up the 21st most fantasy points to the position. So, I love my boy Rachaad White, but a little spooked there because, he's still dealing with the groin injury. Then you got DeAndre Swift in a really good opportunity against the Colts run defense, giving up the 23rd most fantasy points. But I don't know about you guys. I don't trust anything about that Bears offense right now, and I certainly don't trust DeAndre Swift, but it is a solid matchup. And to top all that off, you got, the much anticipated two-headed monster backfield of Zamir White and Alexander Mattison going up against the Carolina Panthers, giving up the second most fantasy points to the running back position on the season and are still arguably the worst run defense in all of football. You could flip a coin if you own Zamir White and or Alexander Mattison. Probably one of them is going to score. But yeah, we have got some really good matchups for some kind of questionable running backs. But let's break down the 6 running backs that I think you absolutely have to start as we approach week 3. All right, let's kick things off here with a Thursday night player, which for videos like this, I usually try to stay away from Thursday night matchups, but I really like Rhamondre Stevenson going into the week. He's been absolutely killing it, and this Patriots offense has been very reliant on Rhamondre Stevenson. 25 rushing attempts in week 1, 21 in week 2. Very smart here, knowing that Jacoby Brissett is the quarterback that they're going to need to continue to rely on Stevenson at the running back position and this run game as a whole. He's currently sitting as the RB8 in fantasy football. And, this might feel like a very easy plug and play, especially with all the injuries we've seen at the position, but we see a lot of rosters. We get a lot of questions here at the channel, and I know a lot of you guys ended up drafting Stevenson as like an RB3 or 4, so he might be still kind of a player who is hanging around the bench area, and he's just a player against this Jets run defense that we have to fire up. I know it's a road game. I know people still look at that Jets defense and get scared and everything, but they've been pretty friendly overall in terms of their fantasy points allowed, but more importantly, in terms of the running back position. This run defense was not good against Jordan Mason in week 1 and was not good in week 2 against Tony Pollard and company. And this run defense for the Jets was bad last year as well. So Rhamondre Stevenson, a very safe start. Like I said, I try to stay away from Thursday night matchups, but I think at the end of the day that Rhamondre is going to give you another very solid stat line. Not a player that we want on the bench. He's averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game on the season thus far. No reason to bench Rhamondre Stevenson anytime soon. He's going to have another dominant performance in week 3. All right, next up, we have Tony Pollard, who made last week's video, and I'm keeping him in again this week. And a couple reasons here. I think Pollard, similar, I try to kind of look at players who aren't obvious must starts or guys that you drafted later, picked up off the waiver wire. And for a lot of people, Pollard's still sitting as like an RB3 or 4 unless you've been decimated by injuries. So he can end up in starting lineups as kind of like a fringe start. And I told you guys last week, I just really liked that spot for Tony Pollard at home against the Jets run defense that we just talked about after Pollard had 18.4 fantasy points against a better Bears defense on the road in week 1, but 15.2 in week 2 against the Jets. Another solid performance. As you see on the screen, he's averaging 16.8 fantasy points through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now he gets a Green Bay Packers defense that had its moments last week. The secondary's playing fine. They 3 interceptions against Anthony Richardson, and 2 interceptions in week 1 against Jalen Hurts. But this run defense for the Packers has been very, very poor. They got absolutely decimated by Saquon Barkley in week 1, and they were better in week 2 against Jonathan Taylor, but he still had a solid fantasy performance, and the Colts offense was struggling as a whole. So Tony Pollard in line here for another heavy workload. 16 rushing attempts in week 1, 17 in week 2, and at least 4 targets in both games this season. And Tajay Spears is expected to play, but he's been dealing with an ankle injury since last week's game, so he might be somewhat limited. You never know. And everything here is pointing towards there's no real split with the Titans' backfield. It's just Tony Pollard getting the volume, and he'll face the Miami Dolphins in week 4. So in last week's buy low video, I talked about Tony Pollard because of this stretch in terms of run defenses. The Jets, the Packers, and the Dolphins, very, very solid. The Titans get an early bye week in week 5, but then they get the Colts. I mean, right now, as things stand here going into week 3, the Packers, the Dolphins, and the Colts are all bottom 5 run defenses. I mean, this is a fantastic schedule for Tony Pollard. He's a start in week 3. We can't afford to bench him, and he is a start until further notice. I had to talk about Derrick Henry last week because after that week 1 performance with just 10.6 fantasy points and, everyone freaking out about Derrick Henry and Justice Hill getting, the receiving work and everything, and Henry looking little sluggish, so to speak. I told you guys, don't bench Derrick Henry in week 2. I mean, I was seriously getting questions about not starting Derrick Henry in week 2. And I told you guys, I think we'll be reminded why, we drafted Derrick Henry in week 2 against his Raiders run defense at home. And it was good, 16.6 fantasy points, 84 yards on the ground, a touchdown, 4.6 yards per carry, added a reception for 12 yards, but I don't expect, receiving work out of Derrick Henry. So that was just nice to see. But now we're going into week 3 and I have more people freaking out about Derrick Henry, because he did not look bad against the Raiders, but we expected a lot more. And some people are still looking at Derrick Henry he's not I don't know what you guys are looking for, because like I said, he's still averaged over 4.6 yards per carry. I know we haven't seen that game yet with Derrick Henry where he just absolutely lights things up and we're reminded of the true Derrick Henry that we know, but he still has such a valuable role in this offense. And this week he gets the Dallas Cowboys, who just gave up a whopping 4 touchdowns to Alvin Kamara in week 2. Also a defense that was very friendly to the Browns running back Jerome Ford, who we banned from these videos earlier, but in week 1. So this Cowboys defense has been playing pretty awful all around, but specifically awful against the running back position. This is a road game for the Ravens, but I'm not even talking about this anymore. If you have any doubts about Derrick Henry moving into the week, put those doubts to the side. He remains a must-start running back as we approach week 3. All right, next up, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks running backs. And this is a little bit of a confusing call because Kenneth Walker is still dealing with that oblique injury. At the time I'm recording this, he hasn't practiced this week. So we don't really know if it's going to be Kenneth and Zach Charbonnet or just Zach Charbonnet. I put Zach Charbonnet's stats on the screen since he played in week 2 and Kenneth Walker did not. And right now the trend kind of looks like it might just be Zach Charbonnet out there, but regardless of who is out there, this is just a really valuable matchup for the Seattle Seahawks against the Miami Dolphins, just kind of in a depleted area with everything happening with Tua, but most importantly, this run defense has looked depleted all season long. So a bottom 5 unit against the running back position. And this is a nice home opportunity for the Seahawks offense to come out and have a big day after they've been fine the past 2 weeks, but we just haven't seen like, what is this new offense really going to do this year? And this is a good opportunity for them to establish themselves. So Walker, fine in week 1, a great performance, 18.9 fantasy points. Charbonnet, a touchdown in week 1, 12.1 fantasy points. Then in week 2, acting as the sole lead back with Kenneth Walker out, 17.9 fantasy points. So I actually think even if Walker plays, Zach Charbonnet is still a very solid start. I think we could see another game script that allows for a double-digit stat line to Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker like we saw in week 1 against the Broncos. So if you own either Seattle Seahawks running backs, I do think they should be in starting lineups this week. And I will say, if Walker misses week 3, then Zach Charbonnet is just a phenomenal start this week, getting all of the volume here, getting all of their primary receiving work against the Dolphins. So I really do like Zach Charbonnet if you own him and Walker does not play. But if both of these guys end up playing, I think they are absolute must-starts as we approach week 3. All right, next up, let's talk about Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars, a player that I'm seeing a lot of you guys feel really low on, not having a lot of confidence in, and I think that's okay. I mean, where you drafted him, some of you guys drafted him like early 2nd round, so totally understand it. You know, he was the RB3 in fantasy football last year, and it hasn't been a bad start. It's just been kind of a slow start with a low ceiling, and I think what has fantasy managers maybe more concerned is just how this Jaguars offense looks as a whole and how like the quarterback play of Trevor Lawrence looks. And, you know, Evan Ingram has been hurt. Really the only bright spot in this offense has been Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Etienne. So I know we had Tank Bigsby steal touches in week 1. We had the goal line fumble for Etienne, but then, you know, Bigsby's been questionable all week. And I just think Etienne's in a really good spot here. I know this is a road game and everything, but this Jaguars team has got to show up offensively. And this Bills defense, while it looks good and the secondary has been surprising, at least to me, going into the season, the run defense has not been good. So this is a game script that's going to really rely on Travis Etienne having a solid day. I think that the Jags are going to try and run the football first and foremost. And even if the Bills pull ahead in this game, I just think Etienne, you know, he remains that guy who gets the goal line work, a touchdown in each game so far on the season. So I think he's just set for another solid fantasy performance in that 14, 15 point area. Maybe the ceiling's not as high here because I do think that the Bills have the potential opportunity to pull ahead in this game. And there are some offensive struggles for the Jags right now, but Etienne is going to remain that bright spot for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if you own him, he is still a solid RB1 or RB2 start as we approach week 3. All right, last but not least, Monday Night Football. We got my boy Brian Robinson Jr., who made the video last week as well. And if I'm not mistaken, made week one's video. I think Brian Robinson Jr. has been on, the start list every single week so far. And he's shown up 17.9 points in week one, 14.6 in week two. This is another running back who, you drafted much later, maybe has been on your bench here and there. You felt like you've had better plays. Maybe you have had better plays, but Brian Robinson Jr. remains a solid start week in and week out until further notice, and even a player you can consider in the flex. Averaging 16.3 fantasy points so far on the season, has either over 130 rushing yards or a touchdown in each game so far on the year. We've definitely seen that this Washington Commanders offense wants to run the football first and foremost. And there were some positives and negatives in that week two performance against the Giants. The positive was that the Commanders moved the ball down the field pretty effectively and got into the red zone, but then they weren't necessarily scoring touchdowns. And by not necessarily, I mean, they didn't score any touchdowns. They only kicked field goals. But you just imagine if they were able to punch in a couple of touchdowns, Brian Robinson would have an even higher stat line in week two against the Giants. So on the road here, a little bit of a tough matchup, I think, for the Commanders potentially. And, the Bengals' run defense hasn't been awful. They kind of come in right there in the middle of the pack, giving up the 17th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So not awful, but certainly not good. This is a nice opportunity for Brian Robinson Jr. to show why he's been the vocal point of this Commanders offense so far on the season. So he comes in as the RB11 currently in fantasy football. I think he's another solid start, especially if you're dealing with injuries on your roster, like a lot of us are. I think he's in line for another double-digit fantasy performance in week three. Do not leave him on the bench. He's going to help you bring home a dub. And that'll do it for today's video. Don't forget, guys, we have everything that you need for week three fantasy football live on the channel. Start sits at running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends for every matchup, every single relevant player. I'll have those links down below. We have must-start defenses, must-start kickers, or early waiver wire video out. We also have a running back video for running backs that will dominate week three. We'll have a buy low video coming out at the end of the week, a last-minute waiver wire video coming out Saturday, as well as an everything that you need to know video Sunday morning before week three Sunday slate kicks off, as well as fantasy Q&A live streams throughout the week. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any content, and we can help you guys do whatever we can to help you bring home a dub week in and week out. Most importantly, make sure you guys drop your fantasy questions down below in the comment section. I will answer every single comment on this video before Sunday's slate kicks off. So make sure you guys drop your fantasy football questions down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.